What's going on, everybody? You're listening to episode number 57 of Trail Tales. My name is Kyle O'Grady. I am a thru hiker. I am a peak bagger. I'm honestly just a huge hiking nerd, and every single week on this podcast, I chat with another thru hiker, another peak bagger, or another hiking nerd. This week's guest goes by the name of Kristen Gardella. You might recognize that name because she is a previous guest of the show. She has thru hiked the Appalachian Trail and done a bunch of these like shorter New England trails, and that's pretty much what we're going to be talking about this week. We go over 4 different trails / hiking challenges. We go over the Midstate Trail in Massachusetts. We talk about the Monadnock-Sunapee Greenway Trail in New Hampshire. We talk about the Tully Trail, also in Massachusetts, and we finish up at the end of the episode talking about this thing called the Connecticut Blue Trails Challenge, which I don't really know that much about, but again, we're going to get into it during the episode. So yeah, if you like hiking in New England or just in the Northeast in general, I think you're going to really enjoy this one. A lot of these trails don't really get that much publicity. They're not really super well known. And so I think we were kind of able to shed some light on that. And it was a really, really good time. So Kristen, when you hear this, you've been a long time supporter of Trail Tales. And I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you coming on a second time. And let's do a third one soon. We're going to get into the conversation in just a minute here. Real quick, before we start, I just got to plug all the stuff that no one cares about. The Instagram, the website, all that stuff. So yeah, why don't we start there? Instagram at TrailTalesPod. Go follow Trail Tales on Instagram and like some of my shit, please. The website, trailtalespod.com. I'm sure you probably don't need to go to the website if you're listening to this, unless you're like a first-time listener. If that's the case, you can get more information about the show and, of course, listen to all the episodes there, trailtalespod.com. Facebook is a thing as well, and I honestly always forget about the Facebook, but yeah, Trail Tales on Facebook, go look it up. I still see likes kind of trickling in on Facebook every now and then, which is kind of fascinating, so go look it up there. The last thing I'm going to say real quick here is just a couple ways that you guys can help support the show, because I know you're just dying to help support this tiny little podcast, right? iTunes reviews, in particular 5-star iTunes reviews, are super helpful. It helps the show rank higher, helps more people get exposed to it. So if you go leave a 5-star iTunes review, Apple Podcasts, whatever review, that would be really, really awesome. And I will read it out loud during an introduction to the next episode or whatever. And that's exactly what I'm going to do now. I haven't really been getting many reviews the past couple weeks. I mean, that's not good. Let's get some more reviews. This one says, sobering. My passion for hiking was reignited after decades, and I now feel more connected. New generations through Trail Tales. That's pretty cool. As a sober hiker, I especially appreciate hearing from others whose experience is not centered around intoxication, which is kind of a bizarre review, but I appreciate the 5 stars nonetheless. I am slightly intoxicated for some of these episodes, but this week's episode, the one you're about to hear, I was not, so you'll probably be happy to hear that. With that said, the last thing, Patreon, gotta plug that real quick. If you want to help support the show, like this week's guest has done, go to patreon.com/trailtales. I think that's pretty much gonna do it. Link to all the stuff mentioned here in the show notes as usual. Let's do it. Episode number 57 with Kristen Gardella. Kristen Gardella, how's it going?
All right.
Good. This is our second episode. So everybody listening, if you haven't heard our first episode, I just looked it up 2 seconds before we started recording, and I already forget the number, but number
20-something.
26. I got it right here. 26. Published on May 1st, 2019. So it's been a while. And we pretty much had an entire summer's worth of hiking to catch up on here. So yeah, I'm really excited you could come back on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be part of the repeat guest club.
That's right. Which there's quite a few of you, which I love. Honestly, I've never really had an episode where I feel like my guest wasn't like talking enough or like saying like cool stuff, but I do kind of worry sometimes when I'm talking to someone I don't know that like they're just gonna give like one word answers and then I'm gonna have to just like come up with a bunch of questions on the fly. That has not happened yet, like I said, but it's always just a nice little like reassurance when I have talked to my guests previously, and especially because you've done like a ton of stuff, a lot of stuff that most people I feel like don't know about, and that's another reason, so many reasons here why this is going to be such a good chat. We have a bunch of stuff we're going to bounce around to. There's like two things. I've got this little list in front of me here, just from like the 5 minutes we were talking before we started recording. I already got like a list here. We're going to talk about, or we're going to try anyways. We'll see how far we get, but there's always episode number 3 if we have to, but we're going to try to talk about this thing called the Tully Trail in Massachusetts, which I had literally never heard of until about 2 minutes ago. We're going to talk about the Monadnock-Sunapee Greenway Trail because that's been on my radar for a while. We're going to talk about the Midstate Trail in Massachusetts, and maybe talk about this like Connecticut. What did you say it was called? The
Connecticut Blue Trails Challenge.
Blue Trails Challenge. Okay, and again, I've never heard of that before. So yeah, we've got a bunch of stuff here.
Yeah.
With that said, before we like dive right in, Kristen, why don't you just give people like kind of a reminder of like who you are, what you've hiked, and I've been saying the hiking resume thing a lot lately, and I usually follow that by saying that it sounds really douchey to say that, but I'm kind of a douche, so yeah, why don't you give your hiking?
All right, I will join you in douchedom. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen. My trail name is Crispina. I did the Appalachian Trail in 1999, which was the subject of part of our first episode.
That's right.
I've done the North-South Trail in Rhode Island, the Midstate Trail, the Long Trail, the Coast Trail, Monadnock-Sunapee Greenway, some other stuff. And right now I am working on this thing that Kyle alluded to called the Connecticut Blue Trails Challenge. So a lot of the same Northeast, East Coast trails as everybody else. I haven't yet gotten out to the PCT or the CDT, but who knows? We got time.
That's right. I mean, you said there are a lot of the same Northeast trails that people have done, but I feel like other than the AT and the Long Trail there, like most people haven't done those other trails, and most people don't even know about those other trails. So that's why this is going to be so awesome. Which one do you think we should start with? I mean, like I said, there's like 4 different things there.
I mean, any of them would be great. I mean, I think the really good thing about all these smaller trails is they're great training for people who want to do something like the AT or the Long Trail. They're also, usually there aren't a lot of people on them. So it's a good place to go if you are sick of the crowds. I am happy to talk about any of them. We can talk about the Monadnock-Sunapee Greenway since you did not do it this year.
I did not. I even went as far as buying the map, but I just didn't do it. Honestly, it was like, I was like, I literally like booked the time off of work and everything too. Like I had like all this plan. And then because it's like a point to point, as most long distance trails are, obviously, I like was trying to figure out how I was going to get back to my car. And there's like this taxi company and looked up their stuff, and it was going to be like $120 or something, which honestly isn't even that bad for the distance. But I was like, okay, I could pay $120 for this shuttle, or I could just go do like a loop in the Whites for the same amount of time and not have to pay for the shuttle. And at the end of the day, I don't know. I kind of felt like I should just wait to do the Monadnock-Sunapee Greenway Trail once I have somebody else to go with me, so we could just do the car swap thing. That was my rationale. That was my rationale, anyways. But yeah, so why don't we start? I don't think I know I definitely haven't done like a dedicated segment or episode on this trail. I feel like it might have been brought up like once or twice in previous episodes, but I don't think we've ever talked too much about it. So why don't you just explain like what this trail is, where it is, all the basic like front page of Google kind of stuff.
All right. So it's a fairly short trail. I think with us so I went with a friend of mine. She was preparing to do the Long Trail, so we did this kind of like a shakedown. And depending on which trail you use to access the 2 termini, because it starts and ends the summit of Mount Monadnock, and Mount Sunapee in southern New Hampshire. And depending on what you use to access those two summits, it will end up being somewhere between 48, 52, maybe a few more miles than that. So it's relatively short. You can do it depending on how much you want to push it. You could probably, I know people who've done it in a day, but that's probably not that enjoyable. But you could do it, in several days. There weren't too many people on it, and it's in a night, it's in southern New Hampshire, which I don't think gets a lot of attention because most people just focus on the whites. So
Guilty.
It's a little off the beaten path. Yeah. And so, I think it would be a really perfect shakedown hike for anyone trying to do the long trail or the AT. It's kind of similar. There are shelters. There's a town you go through, so you can get a little bit of a town day and see what that's like. So it's a good sampling of a lot of what trail culture is like.
Yeah, definitely. And it looks really beautiful from what I've seen too. This trail's honestly been on my radar for like a long, long time because back when I was like first getting into hiking and backpacking, I was watching a lot of Trekking On's videos, who's Tuts, the guy, Jonathan. He was a previous guest, episode 9, like way, way back, about this time last year, honestly. And he had like put out a video series on this trail like, years ago. And so I kind of found out about it through that. And so, like I said, I've been like wanting to do this trail for so long, and I was so close back in like September, and I just didn't do it. But it does look really awesome. Geez, where should we start? So I feel like you gave a pretty good overview there. Let's start with camping. So I'm just going to do like some of the through hiking specific things, like what you'd want to know. And that's another thing that kind of drew me to this trail is like the shelters and established campsites from what I understand, because most like smaller trails like this that don't really get that much traffic, that aren't also part of like a bigger trail system, like something put on by the AMC or the Green Mountain Club or something. Most of those trails don't have like shelters, like even established campsites a lot of the time. So yeah, well, can you just like, I feel like maybe there's not that much to say other than there are shelters, but I don't know. Can you talk about that a little bit?
They are pretty special. They did a really great job with them. They're beautiful. They're very clean. They're in good sites too. So it's actually surprising how nice they are. There have been other trails that I've hiked that don't get as much attention as the AT or the long trail, where the shelters are trashed because people are going up there on the weekend to party, and then nobody really takes care of them. So these are beautiful. They're clearly very well cared for. They're mostly positioned at reasonable distances from one another, and they are, they're not too far off the trail. They're, I think, very convenient. And so this is a good trail for someone who maybe they're a little nervous about spending the night in their tent, or they aren't really familiar with their hammock yet and they want to have a backup just in case. The shelters are there. And I will say the entire time that I was out there, I didn't camp with anyone else. I went with one friend, and we never saw anybody else at any of the shelter sites.
Wow.
We did stay at the tent site that they have one night too. We never ran into anybody else. So we basically had these beautiful campsites all to ourselves.
Nice. Do all the shelters have water sources nearby?
So they vary. So the first night, we had kind of a short day on the first day because just the way the shelter timing worked out. It was either we were going to do a short day or we were going to do a really long day. And since I told you my friend and I were doing this for her shakedown hike, I didn't really want to make her do a 20 on her first day out. Didn't think she'd ever want to do it again. So that shelter had a wonderful water source. A couple of them have really nice water nearby. I think there was only one that we went to that was dry at the time.
Okay, but it still like had like something there at least, or like in theory, like it would have some water. It wasn't like they just built it like nowhere close to a stream or anything.
No, there's definitely, you don't really need to make any water carries or anything like that.
Okay, cool.
And there's one of them that is really close to the one town that you go straight through. And when I first read that, I thought, oh my God, this is going to be a problem if we stay there, because I've had some really bad experiences where I've camped too close to town. And I anticipated that it would be, it might be a problem since we were two women. And so we didn't end up staying there. But I found out afterwards that the town that's nearby that shelter kind of sees it as their duty to take care of people there. And so they will actually come out to the shelter. And I've heard of other people getting invited into people's homes for dinner.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you can walk a short distance into town, get some food and bring it back. So it was very, very clean, like all the others. So it seems the shelters are wonderful on this trail.
That's awesome. Yeah. I honestly, like, I pretty much just said this a few minutes ago, but the shelters were like super intriguing to me when I was kind of planning to do this trail over the years. So that's awesome. So while we're on the subject of like water, I mean, the West Coast listeners are probably like going to roll their eyes at this one. They're like, Kyle, it's New Hampshire. Like, there's no water problems. But like, I don't know, for like East Coast standards, maybe again, going back to like comparing it to the AT or the long trail, how does like the water situation for the entire trail like kind of compare? Like, is there anything, like any dry stretches, again, East Coast dry stretches, like anything like that?
So you mean a mile?
Yeah.
No, I mean, we never had any problems. I mean, we were there in the spring too, so we probably had too much water. There were a lot of parts of the trail that were very, very wet. You know, if I had run out of water, I probably could have pulled water from the trail itself at times. And there was a flooded part we went through where we were probably in water maybe halfway up to our knees. So
oh, wow.
There was definitely plenty of water when we went. So I might even suggest spring is maybe a little too early because it was late spring, so it was post mud season, but
like May, like early May.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So maybe either May or early June, and it was still a little too wet. So I might even push it a little later than that.
Yeah, definitely. Probably fall would be a good time. I mean, that's, to be fair, like pretty much any trail in New England you could say that about, but I don't know, because from my understanding, you're not really going over that many like super high mountains too. So I'm assuming a lot of this trail is just like forest walking. So obviously that would lend itself to fall. That being said, I know there are like a couple summits, obviously the two on each respective terminus, but I know there's like at least one or two other ones that you go through like in the middle of the trail too as well, right?
Yeah, so you hit some little small mountains in the 2000s, and depending on whether or not you start or finish at Monadnock, that's either your highest point is your first day or it's where you finish.
Okay.
That is the highest point on the trail. Sunapee is lower than 3,000 feet, and most of the other little mountains that you go over around in the 2000s, but there's still a lot of really beautiful views from them. I definitely was surprised at how many really expansive, gorgeous views we had, and you'll get lots and lots of views back towards Monadnock. We went northbound from Monadnock to Sunapee, and you get lots of views back towards Monadnock at all times. So you could really see how far you've come, and it's just beautiful. I mean, obviously the views off of Monadnock are really, really fantastic. For anyone who's never been up there, the summit is completely treeless, even though you're you're lower than 4,000 feet. Mm-hmm. So the views up there are just really fantastic as well.
You're getting me pumped on this trail. Jeez. I don't know. I love just like walking through like the forest. Like maybe that's why I never really understood why people call the AT like the Green Tunnel and stuff. Like I genuinely just like to walk through like forests. So that like just gets me so excited, especially because like southern New England, I feel like, and in a lot of other places in New England as well. But I don't know, just something about the forest down there, like in southern Vermont too. Like it just, I don't know. It's just kind of nice. And one thing I remember from Tutz's YouTube series, it seemed like, or at least according to him, it seemed like there was quite a few miles that were on maybe like, I don't want to say like logging roads, but just like trail that wasn't like maybe originally designed for this trail. I think he used the term like carriage roads or something like that.
There's definitely a lot of that.
Yeah, can you just talk about that a little bit more? Because honestly, I really like to hike on those kinds of paths and stuff. I'm just trying to think about like what might have been there before the trail was. So
the treadway is I think it's pretty approachable. It's not super technical or anything like that. There are a lot of cart paths and fire. You do spend some time on some dirt roads or fire roads and some like double track roads through the woods. So there's a lot of variety of that. It makes it a lot easier. You're not scrambling through single track. So again, if somebody is kind of new to backpacking, this is probably a great trail for them, because you do get some single track trail, you get some roads, you get some cart paths and logging roads. So it varies a lot, and it can be easy to make time too, because you don't have a lot of, there's not a ton of obstacles in your way, and there's not a lot of times where you have to be doing any hand over hand scrambling or anything like that.
How about like elevation gain? So I know you said like there are some smaller mountains, and obviously the Mount Monadnock is a bigger mountain for these standards anyways. But it sounds like this trail isn't terribly difficult. So what about those climbs that do exist? How tough are they? I pretty much just, I don't need to drag that question on any longer.
Yeah, I think your most difficult climb is going to be Monadnock. So, and there are different ways to get up Monadnock that some of them are easier than others. We decided to go up from the south on the trail that is the end point of the Monadnock Trail, because that's another trail. So that goes from the summit of Monadnock down to the Massachusetts border. It's 18 miles, and then that hooks up with the New England Trail. So you can actually go all the way from Long Island Sound to Sunapee on a continuous footpath if you want to, by linking all of those together. But we went up that way because I'm trying to, at some point, I'll go back and do the rest of that Monadnock Trail as well. So I wanted to do that just to get a piece off of there. And there was definitely some very steep climbing to the summit of Monadnock from that angle. There are easier trails to get up there, but Monadnock is surprisingly difficult for being a very small mountain. It's very, very rocky at the top. There can be some very steep exposed areas too. And so it really depends, but that's going to be your biggest climb of the whole thing. So I think the biggest question to think about when deciding to hike this trail is, do you want to finish there with that big, beautiful view, or do you want to get that out of the way on your first day? We chose to do it northbound because the way that we had planned our time, we were going from Thursday to Sunday, and I did not want to finish on Monadnock on a Sunday because I don't know if you've been up there, but it's constantly covered with people. And I
haven't been up there, but I did hear somewhere, maybe it was from Tuts's video again, that it's like one of the most climbed mountains in the entire world or something crazy like that.
Yes, and every time I've been up there, the summit is just so crowded. And so I figured, okay, a Thursday has got to be better than a Sunday. But even so, we get up to the top of Monadnock, and it's our very first day. We're all excited. We're in the woods. It's beautiful. It's quiet. We get to the top, and there's all these teenagers up at the top, and we're blasting music out of a speaker. And the very first thing I heard when I peek up to the summit is "Bwah, bwah, bwah, bwah." Oh my God. Well, there you go. That's what this trip is going to be about. So,
that's actually kind of funny.
Yeah. Looking back on it now, it's pretty hilarious. But I was so mad at the time. God damn it. And so I couldn't wait to get off of the summit because I just wanted to get away from that. But once we got off of Monadnock, it was fine. We really saw very few people. Yeah,
I'm not really much of a fan of when people bring the speakers and stuff with them when they're hiking. That's never good. Although it would be kind of funny if I like got up to the top of a mountain and then somebody was just like playing those like horns.
Yeah, I mean that should happen every time I get to the summit of a mountain now, and she just blah, 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 blah.
I know, right? Oh my God,
perfect.
Throwback to episode 50 of Trail Tales. Shout out to Baker for that one. That was his idea. If anybody remembers that episode, every time we said episode 50, it was and yeah, that was Baker's idea. Funny stuff. All right. Where should we go? I'm thinking about moving on to the next trail now, just because we have so much on the roster here. But is there anything else you feel like needs to be mentioned or said about this trail? Because I didn't get a chance to ask like as many questions as I usually do about these trails. So yeah, anything else?
So normally I would not expect on a trail this short to get any trail magic, and I was wrong. We were maybe halfway in, so I'm starting to get to the point where I'm carrying trash and I don't want to carry all that trash. And I was looking around for garbage can everywhere, and there were no garbage cans. That's something to mention is this trail is very clean. The people who care for it really do a great job. It's beautiful. And there were no people around, so there wasn't very much trash left from them either. But we were on a road walk at one point, and I looked to the side, and someone had built this little tiny chapel, but they had water, they had a trash can, they had a register, and it was just so funny to see something like that on such a short trail. I was really surprised. So I was able to dump all my trash. We got some cold water. We signed their register. Wow. It was really nice again for my friend who was using this as a shakedown to see, the generosity of trail angels and to have some trail magic even in a short trail like that. You see a lot of generosity on this trail, even such a short distance. When we went into the one town that you go through, Washington, there's a wonderful general store that will make you all kinds of huge grease bombs of food, and they have beer too. And we got some beer, we got some sandwiches, and they have a little gazebo in town. And I went to go sit down in the gazebo, and I looked, and there was an outlet, so I was able to charge my devices, sitting in the gazebo, eating food and drinking beer. And then we started walking out of the town, and some people came up and asked us if they could help us. They knew what we were doing. They knew we were hiking. But they wanted us to come in their home and get some more cold water, and they had bug spray for us, and they wanted to warn us about all the bears they had seen recently. And so all of the people that we met on this whole trip were so great. And so I thought it was such a great introduction to anyone who was getting into backpacking and kind of getting some of that exposure to really how, great trail communities and trail angels. So thumbs up on Monadnock-Sunapee Greenway.
That's so awesome. Like it's great to hear that the people, I think you said it was Washington, New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. Yep. It's cool to hear that the people there are like embracing the trail, even though there's not that much traffic, because I'm sure you've experienced this before, and a lot of people listening have experienced this. When you go into a town, especially on the trails that aren't as well known as like the long trail, the AT, and the people around you just like have no idea what you're doing. And I feel like that would be kind of like expected for a trail like this that doesn't get that much traffic. And so, yeah, just the fact that the people there are like down with that and willing to help out the hikers is really awesome. You're making me really want to hike this trail. I'm going to definitely get to it next summer.
You got to do it. Just don't do it in the spring.
Yeah, no, definitely not. I'm thinking Northville Placid Trail and Monadnock-Sunapee Greenway Trail. Those are my two like long distance hikes planned for next year. I have
the Northville Placid Trail on my list for next year too. Ooh. We'll see.
Fall. You got to go during the fall for that one.
I'm thinking about it. I don't want to go. I've seen all the pictures of flooding and everything in the early summer and late spring, and I'm worried about how wet it can be. So I've definitely been thinking summer to fall. So we'll see. Cool. We'll see. Yeah,
that's a really cool trail. I gotta get some redemption on that one. Let's talk about the. All right, let's go to the Midstate Trail. Let's do that. Sure. So I have done a little bit of research on this trail. Not just out of curiosity. I haven't really ever planned to do this trail. And there's not very much information available on the Midstate Trail online. So why don't you just talk about like what it is, like where it is? I'm sure the Massachusetts listeners are going to be stoked on this one, and I know there's quite a few of you. So yeah, what is the Midstate Trail?
Hopefully I don't say anything wrong, and then people will just be screaming.
I heard you Googling there, so hopefully, you got all this stuff in front of you.
No, it's been a little while. So I did this in 2018, so I wanted to make sure I pulled it up so I remembered exactly how long it is, etc. So it is about 91 to 92 miles. It goes from the border of Rhode Island up to the border of New Hampshire, roughly central Massachusetts. So it traverses the state. I think it's in the entirety is in Worcester County.
Okay.
So it essentially is the middle of the state. if you're looking for information on this trail, you have to make sure you're looking for the Massachusetts Midstate Trail, because there is also the Pennsylvania Midstate Trail.
That's right. I ran into that problem when I was when I was researching.
Yeah. I'm interested in that one someday too, but I don't know too much about it. But so, yeah, it's another kind of short, long distance trail, which seems to be my specialty lately. You can through hike it. There are shelters. I did this one as a section because I wanted to get another friend of mine kind of exposed to longer trails. And I thought this would be a really good intro. And so we broke it up into a number of sections. And we did car spotting the whole way. So this was my first experience with car spotting along a long trail. And that itself is something we could probably talk about forever. Just all the challenges associated with that. It's an interesting trail. Some of it goes through very densely populated areas. So there were times when we were literally walking through people's backyards. And so there feels like there are a lot of sections where you're next to somebody's house or you're in somebody's backyard. And so, you can imagine going through central Massachusetts. Massachusetts is pretty populated, and especially being near Worcester.
I was going to say, like, my first question here was going to be, like, how is there a trail through there? Because, like, I mean, I haven't been there that much, like, central Massachusetts, but, I do know that there's, like, a lot of people there, obviously. So, yeah, like you're just like walking through people's backyards and stuff. I mean, is it like that for I mean, I know you're not literally going through backyards the entire trail, but like, is it like common throughout the entire like length of the trail?
The southern part of it more so. Okay. Once you get to the kind of the northern half, it gets a little bit more remote, and there's a little bit more elevation in the northern end of it too. The southern end of it is more flat. There's some rolling hills, and I feel like you have a lot more road walking in that section, and you spend more time in people's backyards in the southern half. That being said, I know that it's a huge challenge for the group that maintains it to keep those pathways open. They're constantly working on their relationships with the landowners to make sure that the trail can stay open. So it's really important for anybody who's hiking that trail to make sure they are on their best behavior, because that could really endanger the trail corridor. Because, like I said, you're standing next to somebody's house. They can see you. You know, we had a number of people who came out and were standing in their backyard or something. Like, hey, I'm here too. It was just a really odd experience. I don't know if you remember that part on the AT. You probably, because it's so close to Vermont. So when you're leaving Massachusetts and you're heading up towards the Vermont border.
Yeah, I know where you're talking about in North Adams there.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that part where you go right through the yard, it's like that. You're right next to their house.
Wow,
so it's so important to be a really good trail steward and to be on your best behavior.
So how does that work with camping then? I know you mentioned there was shelters a few minutes ago there, but yeah, if you're constantly, you know, kind of treading on such a, you know, narrow corridor, how does camping work? So I guess we'll start with shelters. How frequent are the shelters on this trail?
So there are 5 of them, and there's one right near the Rhode Island border. So there's one right away when you start. So if you're starting from the south, it's not going to do you any good unless you're, you know, getting there the night before, because it's right there. This trail does connect to the North-South Trail in Rhode Island. So if you were doing that as a continuous through hike, that would be a good option, I'm sure, to stay. But if that's your first day, it's not very useful. And then there's kind of a gap between that border and then when you see your next one, just because, like I said, there's so much population in the southern end that you will have to go a little ways to get to the next one. Hang on, let me look at my guidebook here and see if I can figure out where that next one is. So I remember not seeing one for a long time because there were so many roadwalks and you were in populated areas. So it takes a while to get, okay, here it is, Moose Hill. I mean, I think you're already a third of the way in.
So how do most people kind of do the camping thing? Like, do people just like try to stay at the shelters, or do people like stealth camp as well? Are there like any other campsites that you know of?
there is one other campsite to a tent site. So I think the majority of the people that I know who have done the thing as a through hike have just done big days.
Okay.
You know, it's not a very hard trail to do. The elevation gain is not huge. Your largest mountains that you're gonna encounter are Wachusett, which is our teeny little ski resort here, but it's beautiful. But is Wachusett, and that is the mountain I think that Philip has spent a lot of time training on. And then there's another mountain right near the New Hampshire border, I've heard it's called Watatik and Watatik. So
it's like the most Massachusetts name I've ever heard.
But so since there's not that much elevation gain, you can do some pretty big days. So I think it's not a problem to kind of get between those campsites. And the majority of them are in the northern half. So if you started from the north and went south, I think by the time you got to the south, you'd have some good momentum going and probably wouldn't be an issue.
That makes sense. I know you said it was like roughly 90-ish miles. That's not like a long trail by any means. So I'm sure a lot of people, especially if they're doing bigger days, don't really need to resupply. But on the off chance that you do want to resupply, or you just aren't doing big days, what's are there any opportunities to resupply? Resupply.
You go near you go near restaurants and gas stations, but I don't remember going close enough to any grocery stores or anything like that. So I think it would be, if I were going to do it as a through hike, I would just carry all my food start to finish. And I'd try to do it in, 5 days or something like that. So you might have to do a little bit of a food carry, but like I said, you can stop at some restaurants, some bars, some gas stations to supplement. So,
okay, cool.
Yeah, I don't remember. Since I was doing it as a section, I didn't really think about post offices.
That's fair.
Yeah, I don't know how close they would be to the trail. That
makes a lot of sense. What else should we cover? I literally just did this with another trail like 2 seconds ago, so I should know what other questions. Water. Okay, water. That's probably a good one.
Yeah.
So again, I'm assuming if you're going through like a lot of relatively populated areas, like water. I shouldn't assume this. Is water an issue at all on this trail? Because again, a lot of people don't like to drink water when they're really close to, roads and towns and stuff like that. So can you just talk about that a little bit?
There are a lot of water sources. Again, in the southern end, a lot of them are close to roads, and there are a lot of beaver ponds. So if you are on this trail, you definitely need to treat your water. But there were plenty of them. I did run out of water on one day, but that was mostly because I was being stupid. We hiked this. So this was one of the really interesting things about this experience for me is since we did it as a section hike, we did it over the course of a year, and I hiked in everything from, I think we were out there one day where it was 3 degrees up to a day where it was 100 degrees. So it was really strange to see the same trail in such a wide variety of temperatures and environments. There was, when we started out, we were breaking trail through snow, and then some point in the middle of the year, we had that 100-degree day, and that was the day I ran out of water, of course.
Oh, yeah. Jeez.
Yeah. That day was kind of an unfortunate day. We had originally planned to do about 15 miles. I was trying not to plan really big days because, again, this was a friend of mine who was kind of getting her feet wet into this type of hiking. And we ended up doing a 19-mile day because the map, the guidebook we had was an older one, and the map was wrong, and there had been a reload, and I didn't factor that into the mileage. So it ended up being a much longer day than we thought. Ran out of water. I gave my last water to my friend, and then I basically just ran ahead to see how far we were from the car. So that was there was one very dry section. I think I probably could have found some water, but I didn't bring my water filter again because I was just thinking of it like a day hike. So that was stupid. So even if I was going to do this again, I should have planned better. I should have brought a water filter even for doing day hikes.
Yeah, I always throw my Sawyer just in my day pack, even if I'm just going for a couple miles. So, let's see. That being said, I've never really had to use it on a day hike, but Yeah, never a bad idea. Thing weighs like 3 ounces.
Definitely not.
So if you're going through a lot of like, private property and on roads and things like that, are there ever times where you're not really sure, like, if you're on trail or not? How, like, well marked and navigable, is that a word? I feel like that's a word. is this trail?
This trail is mostly very navigable. They use for blazing, they use these little plastic triangles that have a little hiker symbol on them. And then they also paint yellow. So they're yellow. And then they paint yellow triangles on trees as well. So mostly it was easy to follow. We had one day where we got lost. We were on a road walk and it had been rerouted. And so the route that was in our book was not the one they were using anymore. And there was a major turn that we didn't see because it wasn't blazed. So we were just wandering around on roads for the longest time. And then it started to pour on us. So we're just walking around on roads in the pouring rain. And thankfully, some man saw us and came up to us and was like, "Are you guys okay?" "No, I don't know. We're kind of lost." And he said, "Oh, are you looking for that trail?" At least he knew there was a trail. He's like, yeah. There's some trail. Are you looking for that? I said, "Yes, please." And so he pointed us down this road. And so we walked that way and we intersected it, but we realized we had that whole chunk we had just missed between where we missed the turn and where he directed us to. And because we were trying to complete the whole trail, I made my poor friend walk back on that section that we skipped. And like, we are not skipping any miles. So we walked that whole section back and then turned around and walked back to where we had been. So we had to, we had to do that distance double. And I felt really bad, but I was not about to miss any miles. So, but that was the only time we missed a turn. If that turn had just one blaze, it wouldn't have been a problem. But even through people's backyards, you still find blazing.
Cool. That's good to hear. Definitely.
Yeah.
So you, again, like at the beginning when I introduced this trail, I said that I couldn't really find that much information online. So like what resources did you use to kind of, especially if you're doing section hikes too, that's obviously like a different kind of planning, but there's still a lot there. So yeah, what did you use to plan for this trail? So there is a guidebook. It's the Massachusetts Midstate Trail Guide, and you can order it. There's a website, midstatetrail.org. The people who maintain this trail are associated with the Appalachian Mountain Club, the Worcester chapter, and they have a separate website for the trail, and then you can order the trail guide through there. They have, thankfully, in the last year, they released a new one that is totally up to date. So as long as you get the new one, you should be fine. But it has trail descriptions, it has mileage, it has little maps, and the new maps are all up to date, so you shouldn't get lost in the places that I got lost. And then it's actually a nice little guide because they have a little description of each town that you go through and the history of that town and some highlights you might see. You do go past a lot of different interesting historical sites and cemeteries, and so it's nice. They have some descriptions in there that tell you about what you're seeing. Since it's such a populated area, there are, like I said, there's a lot of different, old historical buildings, and there's even sometimes there's some signs telling you of different events that happen in that area. So you do get some interesting history about Central Mass too, from the guide and also when you're on the trail. I looked around myself for some videos or other stuff, and I didn't find that many. There was one video that I watched of somebody who did a through hike of the trail, and he also did the North-South Trail. And so, and then the Wapak Trail, which I can talk about in a second, that connects to it as well, that goes into New Hampshire. And so I watched his videos and they were kind of helpful, but yeah, there's not a ton of info out there. So a lot of it was just, I figured out stuff as I went. Thankfully the maps in the guidebook helped me figure out where I was going to park cars. Since that was a huge issue, is finding safe places to leave my car, and then leave the other car. So I found the trail guide very helpful. I think the newer one will be even more helpful since it's got new maps. Nice. Let's talk about this Tully Trail, which is a great name for a trail that rolls off the tongue. The Tully Trail. Sounds like cute. Like, I feel like I've never thought of a trail as cute before until I heard the name the Tully Trail.
It's kind of cute. So the great thing about the Tully Trail is it is a perfect loop. So you don't have to worry about car spotting at all. Even if you're going out to do a backpacking trip by yourself, you can do this. If you want to stay overnight, you can. This could definitely be done in a day if you want to do a long day. It's only, 23. 23, there you go. So if you want to do a long day, you could definitely do it in a day. Or you can stay overnight and then you can just walk back to your car. So that's the great thing about it. It's in northern Massachusetts, right along the New Hampshire border. And there's like one significant climb, maybe two. It's all pretty low elevation, but there's a lot of water, lots of waterfalls. That's one of the real features of the trail is the waterfalls.
Huh. Yeah, this looks pretty cool. I'm like doing some Googling right now too. I wonder, there's got to be like some campsites, right? Because I mean, for people like us, we could probably do it in a day, but you got to remember, I'm sure you do remember this. Obviously, a lot of people don't have the ability or desire to do a 20 plus mile day. So, there's got to be like, I'm seeing one shelter somewhere on this trail. Is there anything else? Are there any like stealth sites that you remember? I know you weren't like looking for them, so it might be kind of hard to remember.
There's a campground and there is a shelter.
Campground too, yeah.
Yeah. So there's the campground is kind of at the southern end of the loop, and then the shelter is at the northern end. So if you
true.
You could use either of them. And actually, we did it in 2 days. Figured why, like you said, why would you sometimes, want to do 23 miles in a day? So it definitely makes a nice overnight hike. The way the distance splits up kind of depends where you leave your car, essentially. We left our car down by the Tully Lake campground, which is at the southern end. And then we went clockwise from there. So the first day ended up being around 16 miles, and then the next day was only 7, somewhere in there. So that's the one thing, is that your days aren't necessarily going to be exactly the same length if you want them.
Right.
The shelter at the northern end is one of the shelters on the New England Trail, which you share the path with for a little bit. And so the section that you're overlapping with the New England Trail, that's where your shelter is going to be. When we got there, it was completely packed, though. It was filled with a group of, I don't know, maybe Boy Scouts or something. And, they're not really supposed to take up the whole shelter, but they did.
Doesn't stop them. I've seen that before, too.
Doesn't stop them. So they took up the whole thing. And I went up there to talk to them to try to see if they would at least clear one space. Because I was with 2 friends, and they, one of them had a tent, the other one didn't. And so I tried to get them to clear a space for the person who didn't have a tent. And they were like, I don't know, shuffling around a little bit. And I said, forget it. And so we left and we went back down the hill from the shelter and was trying to find a good place to put 2 tents. And that isn't easy. So if you are planning on camping at the shelter site, it's not the best place to camp.
Really? So there wasn't any like spots for tents around the shelter?
Not too many. We had a really hard time finding them. And
interesting.
Neither 2 of us who had tents have huge tents. So I have a duplex, which isn't tiny, but it's not huge.
Yeah.
And then my friend had one of those Lanshan tents, and it was really hard to squeeze those in. And then I just had my friend who didn't have the tent stay with me because it wasn't worth pushing the issue with the people up at the shelter.
Yeah.
It was also not in the best condition, but it was in a really beautiful spot. So that's one of the nice things about that. But it was, so we made it through the night. It was really cold that night, but we made it. And, then the next day we got up and we kept going clockwise, and you go through you go by some of the most beautiful waterfalls that second day if you do the loop in that order. So there's definitely there's definitely plenty to see on that trail, even though it's short. It's really, really pretty.
Nice. And just from looking at this map here, it looks like water is not an issue on this trail.
No, not at all. No. And we stupidly did this trail in April.
Oh, wow.
That's a very bad idea. We had a lot of fords. There were a lot of bridges that had been washed out. And so, there was one where we had to go through this really raging stream up to our waists. And this was the first time either of my friends, I think, had forded something like that. So I was really nervous about it. So I had to give them kind of the quick rundown on how to do it.
In April, it must have been cold as hell, too, the water.
Yeah, it was. So then we were soaking wet, too. So that's really great. So we definitely had to ford quite a few little streams and creeks that probably, if you had waited a couple of months, would just be fine. And you just rock hop through them. So don't go in April. See, I'm giving lots of advice on what not to do with all these short trails.
Hey, advice is advice.
Yes. But there's plenty of water. No issues with water at all.
Just from looking at this map, I think that if I were to do this trail, the way I would do it is I would try to get somebody else to go with me, and we'd have to have 2 cars, and then I would break it up into 2 days and then stay at the car campgrounds overnight. Mm-hmm. So you could do 2 full days of hiking and do an entire trail or whatever, but you could still stay at the campground and drink beer and have better food. So you get the best of both worlds pretty much. Cause it for everybody listening, it's basically a big loop, and then there's a road that kind of cuts right through the center of the loop. So you could if you had 2 cars, you could not have to drive very far and still be able to kind of cut the trail in half and make it 2 days. And then the campground's right at the end of the road. So that would be pretty easy. That seems like a fun way to do it. I don't know.
Yeah, there's not, you're not going to go through, you'll be on some roads, but you're not going to go through any towns or anything. So yeah, that does sound more fun, because then you could bring your own, you could bring more food and drinks and stuff like that. But because you don't have that opportunity, unlike, some of the other ones I talked about, you're not going to go by a bar or anything like that. So, so that sounds like a good way. If I do it again, maybe I'll do that.
Lots of pro tips in this episode.
Yes. Yeah. Like I said, don't go in spring, because I'm sure as you're looking at the map, you will see it goes through the Tully Lake flood control area at one point on the eastern side. And so I think a lot of times that section of the trail is underwater. So you just have to be careful, unless you really enjoy, if you're prepping for the Florida Trail or something, that would be a good experience.
That's funny. We got a few minutes left here. Before we get to your story, why don't you just tell me about this Connecticut Blue Trails, whatever challenge thing, because I've never heard of this before.
Yes, this is my current project. I'm not sure how long this is going to take. So Connecticut, oddly, for such a small state, at one point had, I'm not sure if this is still true, but had the second largest trail system in New England after the whites. So they're not counting all the private trails on land conservancies and things like that. There are 825 miles of blue blazed hiking trails and side trails on those blue blazed trails in Connecticut. These are so there's a classic hiking book for the state of Connecticut called the Connecticut Walk Book. It's put out by the Connecticut Forest and Park Association, which is a very old hiking and land conservancy group, and they maintain those 825 miles of trail. And so there is a challenge for anyone who wants to do it to hike all 825 of those miles. So it's kind of similar to redlining the Whites or redlining the Smokies, something like that, except you're redlining the state of Connecticut. And so I grew up in Connecticut, and I grew up with my parents' property was right up against the Patchogue State Forest, which is in eastern Connecticut. And so that's a 25,000 square acre state forest. And so it's very large, and there's all kinds of trails out there. And so I grew up with this blue trail in my backyard, And I had no idea what it was called. It was just the Blue Trail. And I used to hike it over and over and over. And then as I got older, I found out there were more of them. And so I thru hiked a couple of them in preparation for doing the AT in the 90s. So I did the Patchogue Trail, which is 28 miles. And then I did this Nehantic Trail, which is like 15 or 16 miles. As you know, I did the Nehantic Trail in a day, and then I did the Patchogue in 2 days to kind of get ready. And so I did those, and I didn't really think about the rest of the state. And at some point I bought this Connecticut walk book, and I looked at it and I was, oh my God, there's so many of them. And I was reading the intro, and there is this challenge to hike all of them. And I never really thought about it again until I moved back to Connecticut now in my old age. And realized that I had already done a good chunk of them. And they also count the AT in the mileage because they.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, well, I've already got that, and I've already got a couple of these Blue Trails. So what more do I need to do to get the rest of them? And so I started planning it out, and my goal was by the end of 2019 to do all of the trails east of the Connecticut River. So the Connecticut River basically splits the state more or less in half. And the eastern side of Connecticut is a little bit more rural, and that's where I live. So I figured, okay, I'm going to get everything done on the eastern side of the river by the end of the year. And so I have spent this year picking away at all of those trails. You have to do the main trails, but you also have to do all their little side trails. So this creates all these issues of figuring out how you're going to loop those.
Yeah.
Doing as little repetition as possible. Because when I go out to work on this project, there are times when I end up hiking the same trail 3 times because I have to get these other little loops and side trails off of it. Or there'll be a day where I end up planning out, okay, I'm going to get this little one and this little one and this little one, and I make 7 different stops with my car during the day just to get 17 miles of trail in. So it's been a really different challenge than through hiking. Sometimes it's not that enjoyable because I'm like, oh my God, I have to do this thing. So it feels like that. But just today, before I got on with you, I finished finally doing all of the trails east of the river. So
nice.
Yeah. So I'm about 350 miles into 825 miles. And I have to figure out, am I going to set myself, do I need to do this next year? Do I need to finish it? I think I'm going to give myself a couple more years because I'm mostly doing this by myself. And so I have to drive to all of these different trails. And the further away I get from my home, the more time it's taking. I mean, there was a day where I drove an hour and a half just to hike a mile and a half. So that, and that's a pretty significant time investment. So I have to kind of figure out how long do I need to do this? And I'm trying, I figure I got to complete it by 2025 at the latest, but I'd like to do it faster, but it really depends since nobody else seems to want to jump in with me. So
that's cool though. That's like a cool, like unique type of challenge. And especially because I know you're talking about the driving and stuff, and it is kind of a pain in the ass, but in like the grand scheme of things, Connecticut isn't like a huge state. In fact, I think it's the second smallest state or something like that.
Small. So it's pretty small.
Like that is cool. Like there's a similar thing here in Vermont. It's the not the end to end like long trail, but it's like called the side to side. So you hike all of the blue blazes that are like kind of off of the long trail, and like I don't think like many people do it at all, but like I've been like kind of thinking about maybe doing that someday. And I don't know, I haven't really committed to that, but it's like a similar thing. Like it's not like a through hike, and it's also not like a peak bagging things. You're not reaching the summits of anything, or that's not the objective anyways, but you're still like just covering miles. So I don't know. I think that's cool, and it's definitely a pretty unique type of hiking challenge.
Yeah, and if I finish it all, there's only a few people who have done it, so I think just because it's, if you really want to do it, you have to get all these little side trails. And so most people aren't that interested in it.
Yeah.
And so there's only, I think, about 10 people who have done it. So if I finish the whole thing, I get a fleece vest, which I'm pretty set on. I need to get that vest. But it's been fun because I've done a couple of the trails as through hikes, as short little through hikes. even if I should probably not say this on a podcast, but even if I'm not really supposed to camp out there, I've done a couple of them.
I didn't hear you.
Yeah, where I've done some stealth camping, and like there's this one trail that I did this year that was 51 miles, and I did that in 2 days. I figured let's just bang the thing out. So, and I stayed overnight, hopefully in a legal spot. But again, I run into some of the issues that it goes through some populated areas at times. So, like the southern part of the New England Trail is through Connecticut, but that is goes through some very populous areas. So it's kind of difficult to do the New England Trail as a through hike, or even the Connecticut part of it, just because of the camping options. They're not great. So as I move into Western Connecticut, I'm going to run into some of those challenges. It would be great if I could do some of these things as overnights, but it's not always going to be the case, just because of the lack of camping. Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely would make it a little bit more challenging, but it wouldn't be any fun if it wasn't a challenge. So
no, that's true.
There you go. True. Trying to spin like logistics into being fun as best I can there. We're getting towards the end here, Kristen. Do you want to do another story, your second story on Trail Tales? Sure.
So I have been working on trying to increase my mileage, my daily mileage, because I'm looking at I just discovered the world of competitive hiking challenges. There's this thing called the Allegheny 100 that I'm really interested in, where you have 50 hours to go 100 miles or something like that. And so I'm getting very interested in this. So I've been increasing my mileage. So this summer, I tried to do the North-South Trail again. So for those of you who are not familiar, go back and listen to my first episode.
That's right.
But it is Rhode Island, the tiny little state. Rhode Island has a long distance hiking trail that goes the length of the state, and it hooks up with the Midstate Trail if you want to make a longer through hike. But it's 78 miles long. And so last year I did it in 3 days. And this year I said, well, I'm going to do that one better, and I'm going to do it in 2 days. So including the approach trail that I use, it would end up being about 80 miles. And I figure, all right, 2 40-mile days, I'm going to do it. And I had never done a 40-mile day. My day at that point was 32. So, those 8 miles they really don't seem like they should be that much, but they are. So I got dropped off early in the morning, and I was well on my way. By noon, I had 20. And then I figured I went on the longest daylight weekend of the year. I did the summer solstice. So I figured plenty of daylight, no problem. So I did my 20. I kept going. I started to get really bad blisters, and I don't normally get blisters. I've been hiking enough that it's not really a problem. But I was getting terrible blisters. It was so painful, and I'm limping, and I get past 30, and it's getting horrible. I'm like, God, what is going on? This is really not the norm for me. It just seems really out of the ordinary, but I kept going, and I get to, and it's getting later in the day. It's probably around 6, and I'm kind of probably around, I'm in the high 30s at that point, getting close to 40, and I'm getting close to the halfway point, which is where I figure, okay, I'm going to stop and camp there. And I got plenty of water because I knew it was going to be a dry camp. And I get to this portion of the trail, which is a rail trail, and I'm walking down it, and I see ahead of me this huge chain link fence across the trail. This is new. I did not expect this. So there's just this, the whole thing is closed off, and then the chain link fence goes off into the woods on either side of it for quite some ways. So there's no way to go around it. And ahead of that was a bridge over a pretty deep ravine that has a river in it. And the bridge is under construction, and there's a bunch of heavy machinery sitting on top of the bridge, and the whole thing's closed off, and you can't go through. And at this point, like I said, I'm in the high 30s, and I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm like almost halfway. I've been busting my ass all day, and I look up, and there's a little sign that says, oh, well, if you'd like to get around this, you can do this, essentially 9 to 10 mile road walk back this way and around to the other side. So if I had done that, then I would have made myself walk back to the other side of that bridge because, again, I'm trying to do a through hike. So I would have ended up doing like a 50-mile day. So at that point, my feet are killing me. I said, forget it. I'll just come back and do it at some other point. I don't live that far from here. So I call my dad, and I figured out a way to get to a road where he could come and pick me up. And so I did end up getting a 40-mile day because the whole route I put together ended up being 40. So he comes to pick me up, and he's got a cold beer because, remember, my dad thru hiked the AT with me, so he gets it. So he's got a cold beer and some other stuff, and he takes me home. And I'm really bummed because I really was excited about doing this in 2 days, and it was just really sad. And so I go on Facebook, and I post to this hiking group I'm in about my failed attempt and how bummed I am. And, all these people are saying, oh, but you did a 40-mile day, and that's so cool. And I say, yeah, but I can't believe I couldn't get this done. And some woman comments on my post and says, well, this was the next day. Well, you should probably be pretty happy you didn't finish, because at the end of the trail where it comes out to the ocean at the coast of Rhode Island, there was a massive manhunt the day you were supposed to finish. Oh. They were looking for a murderer in the woods who was camped along the trail.
Oh, geez. Wait, what?
So there was this guy who had just killed somebody in Massachusetts and fled to southern Rhode Island and was hanging out on the North-South Trail. That's where they found him.
Oh, man.
And he shot himself, and so they ended up finding his body. So what would have happened to me if that bridge hadn't been out? I would have kept going, and either I would have met this guy or I wouldn't have been able to finish anyway. I'd have gotten like 85 miles and 75 miles and not been able to finish because they had the trail closed. Or I would have finished, and then my husband couldn't have come to get me because they weren't letting any cars into the area because they were looking for this guy. But it would have ended badly no matter what. So this fence and this bridge that was out that wasn't posted anywhere saved me. So
Jeez,
I'm like,
yeah.
Man, the trail provides. It
That's
really
so
does.
Crazy. Yeah.
Because
talk about like turning a bad situation into like a less bad situation.
Seriously. And I look back on the whole experience, and I'm like, I know you just did that episode on kind of spirituality, and I'm not a super spiritual person, but I'm like, I got the worst blisters of my life. Then this bridge was out. Like, something was definitely trying to stop me.
Yeah, really.
Like, from going any further and getting myself into this bad situation. I don't know.
That's crazy. Wow.
It's that trail magic,
That's gnarly. Do you remember the dude's name? I don't want to give him any.
No, I don't remember it.
I'm just curious because I mean, I'm obviously up in Vermont. Like, I feel like I vaguely remember like something like that happening around then, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yep.
Yeah, on that note, I think we're gonna wrap it up here, Kristen. That's so crazy. Thank you for coming on again. Thank you for being like a longtime supporter of the show, a Patreon supporter. I didn't even say that. Yeah, I missed so many chances to plug the Patreon this episode. Thank you so much.
I did not buy my way onto the episode.
No, definitely not. You were not a Patreon supporter during our first episode, so let's be clear about that. Shameless plug. Yeah, just thank you so much for everything. And we're going to have to do a third one because you talking about the New England Trail, another trail I know absolutely nothing about, has got the gears turning. And I'm like, that would be a good episode. Again, lots of people that listen to this show are from Massachusetts and the other places around New England, New York as well. So yeah, we're going to have to do round 3 at some point.
Well, yeah, and if we both do the Northville Placid Trail, we can actually talk about you successfully completing it. And
knock on wood. Hopefully. I think that's going to do it. Do you want to plug like your social media, any of that stuff?
Sure. The only thing I have Facebook, but it's mostly just to be in hiking groups.
Do not send her a friend request, people.
Yes, don't. I won't answer it. But so I'm on Instagram as Mrs. Von Jazz Hands, which is just MRS Von Jazz Hands. If you would like to find me, I am posting updates from the Connecticut Blue Trails Challenge, and I also post all kinds of other stuff from all my hiking adventures. So if you're interested in short, long trails, you know where to find me.
That's right. Cool. Thank you so much, Kristen. Thank you to everybody listening as well. There's going to be no episode next week because it's going to be Christmas. So, yeah, thank you and have a good one.